Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 60 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with a U.S. Representative. Please welcome Rick Larsen. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. Today, I got to speak with Rick Larsen, who many of you probably know is a U.S. representative for our state, and he actually grew up very locally. He grew up in Arlington, Washington. So I had a very short conversation with him because he's pretty busy and had a lot of things he was on a thing doing meeting with a bunch of different small businesses and stuff like that. But he was able to squeeze in a 15-minute interview with me. So we got to dive in. We tried to dive into a lot of the current events that are going on right now because we didn't have a whole lot of time to get into more of his backstory and how he got to where he is. But we hear where he grew up. A little bit about his family, and then we get into some of the current events that are going on, including what's going on between the House and the Senate and all of that. We get into a little bit of how the Black community has been affected by COVID and how certain things like the PPP loan, which is the payroll protection program, how that wasn't being utilized by Black business owners, but then they made some adjustments that really helped it. So they saw those and were able to get those applications in. So how they made small adjustments, but on a larger scale, how can we, moving forward, what are some things that they see changing? So anyways, in this small 15-minute conversation, we actually got through quite a bit of stuff. So hopefully we can have him back later on the podcast and we can dive deeper into some of these subjects. But without further ado, here's my conversation with U.S. Representative Rick Larsen. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with U.S. Representative Rick Larsen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Rick.
I will do that. So I was born and raised in Arlington, Washington.
Okay.
And my family has been in the region for about 130 years. I like to say it's longer than some families and not as long as other families in the area. But on my dad's side, there were Norwegian immigrants who came in the late 1800s.
Okay.
My mom's family came from Germany in 1832. And so we've got a long history here, but again, not as long as some folks in the area. I was born and raised in Arlington. As I said, I'm one of 8 kids, and my mom is still in Arlington in the house I grew up in.
Nice.
And and still get a chance to see her every once in a while, mow her lawn, wash her car, do things that sons are supposed to be doing.
Very cool. Where are you in the 8 kids? I'm
4th.
Okay.
Right in the middle, which is kind of where some people think I am politically as well. But I think that being from a large family has helped me in politics a little bit. There are a lot of personalities you're always dealing with, and those personalities are dealing with me as well. It's not just a matter of me having to deal with people. I understand that I'm bringing my own personality into things as well, and that can influence how people see me. And so, you learn a lot being one of 8 kids.
Yes.
In a house that's built probably for 3 kids.
Yeah, I've got 4 kids, and so you watch the negotiations, you watch the...
That's about right. That's about how it works.
So I'm sure you use all of those skills on a regular basis.
Indeed. Yeah.
Very cool. What drew you to politics then?
So my dad was on the Arlington City Council for quite a long time, and he was a planning commissioner as well for the city of Arlington. My mom was very active in schools, I think in part because I'm one of 8, and there was always a Larsen kid somewhere in elementary school, middle school, or high school, and my mom wanted to keep tabs on us, so she was actively involved in schools. Although she was never on the school board, I like to think she was sort of the phantom 6th school board member, just to keep tabs on things. So I think because of that community involvement from both my parents, that influenced me a little bit about how to think about community and how to be involved in our community. And that was in part a driving force for me to get involved in what we commonly know as politics. But so I ran for office in 1990. Get my years right. 1997 for Snohomish County Council, and won and took office in '98. And then a couple years later, ran for U.S. Congress.
Okay, cool. How do you? So that's a pretty decent span of years. And how do you feel politics has changed over that course? Because I've heard a lot of I've heard a lot of people through listening to podcasts and discussions, and that the left is farther left and the right is farther right, and that things are all crazy now. So,
well, things weren't uncrazy in 2000 and 2001 either. I mean, so I think that things have changed a little bit. Technology has changed. I remember an orientation in 2000. Go back to DC and you start your orientation, being issued a BlackBerry and a pager. The pager was used for paging us to tell us when there was a vote on, and the BlackBerry was news to me about how to use a BlackBerry, mainly using it for email, but also it's an early smartphone that wasn't an Apple product, and the U.S. House of Representatives used BlackBerries, so that's just that's 2000 now up at 2020. Smartphones are typical. Certainly, that's the same for general society and the general economy. We get about I remember in 2001, we got about 35,000 pieces of mail, paper mail. That first year. Now, last year I got 60,000 individual emails to the office, and about the same number of pieces of paper mail, about 35,000. So the use of technology has changed. That's one big change. The number of people I represent have gone from 646,000 to about 755,000.
Okay.
In the district. Political brinksmanship is a lot more commonplace. You mentioned left versus right or extremes. That manifests itself sort of though in brinksmanship, but taking issues to the deadline to force some resolutions. I see a lot more of that than I did in the early 2000s when I was first elected. Positive change. There are many more women and people of color elected to the U.S. House of Representatives than there were in 2000, 2001. And that's so we're getting slightly more reflective of the great diversity of the United States. But just thinking about women, who are 52% of the population, I think there's about 120 members of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate total that are women out of 535. So that's not 52% of the population.
Right. Well, and it also brings up a lot of what's going on right now, especially with the Black community and what's kind of going on there. What kind of changes things? What are things you're seeing right now?
Yeah, this is it's a you could say an exciting time, but obviously that really doesn't describe what's going on in the United States between the COVID-19 pandemic and the increasing understanding of systemic racism that exists in the United States as well, and the need for Congress as the elected body to take action on these issues. I think that when it comes to the needs of the Black community, we really need to be a lot better in this country about responding to systemic racism and historical scars from slavery that still exist and still play themselves out in a variety of ways in the United States, but sort of insidiously, sort of differently, thinking about the long-term impacts of redlining in our communities. That is forcing Blacks to live in certain areas and not providing loans to buy homes in areas. That there is still a legacy of that. I'm just thinking about the pandemic. We did the, you received a PPP loan, a payment protection program loan. We found after the first round of PPP loans that businesses owned by people of color were not getting the information about PPP, and because we weren't utilizing financial institutions that people of color generally were using. So we made changes in the second round and actually did a better job of getting these PPPs to small businesses that are owned by people of color. But again, we have to think about these issues of equity in the design of the things that we do in Congress, and hopefully we've learned a few lessons.
Well, and you mentioned redlining, and I know that's a conversation I've heard from a civilian level that we talk about and like an issue. Is there any conversation on the congressional level of redoing some of that to try and fix some of that stuff?
Yeah, we have a law called the Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, and that was passed in the late 70s, I think, to try to address redlining. So the mechanisms do exist in the law to for Congress and for the agencies like Housing, Urban and Development Department to utilize in order to ensure that we don't slip back into redlining. But we still have a long way to go in this country. We have come a long way, and we should be happy about that, but we shouldn't be satisfied with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think the difficulty is we're talking at when we say systemic, or it's this structural level, which means you're breaking down everything at the foundational level, which is so much more difficult. But it's I think as people are saying, it's very necessary to really see true change in what's going on, right?
Yeah, some of these barriers are baked into the system. Again, I just use an example of the PPP, the Payment Protection Program, which largely people say was a success to help support small businesses in the pandemic. But again, in the first round of PPP, we did not see businesses that are owned by people of color accessing that program as actively as businesses owned by whites. That's just a matter of fact. That's just a sheer matter of numbers. It was really clear. So we did go back. We did make changes to PPP, and then did see a definite increase in the number of businesses owned by people of color accessing PPP because of the changes that we made. We have to be deliberate about these things and recognize them and not be afraid that there's a problem.
Right.
Actually recognize the problem and let's figure out how to fix it.
Right. So that brings in can you kind of bring us up to date with what's going on with not just COVID, but like the bills around that and everything that's going on there? Yeah.
Well, like I say, just because negotiations on COVID-19 aren't going well doesn't mean they aren't going. They are going. There's a wide chasm between what the House of Representatives wants and what the Senate and the White House want. In the House of Representatives, we passed the HEROES Act, which is the next version of COVID-19 relief, in May. And then it was 10 to 11 weeks before the Senate even bothered to take up anything with regards to the next stage of COVID-19 relief. So now the House and the Senate are at a bit of an impasse, where the House position is that we want to help state and local, tribal, and territorial governments because of the economic fallout means fewer services are being provided by local governments. That we take that for granted until there's no one there to provide that service. And so in the House version of the HEROES Act, we proposed nearly $1 trillion for all state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. We proposed about $100 billion for schools to help them with reopening, if they're going to reopen, either in person or hybrid or online. $100 billion in the HEROES Act for broadband, expanding broadband access. And if we want to talk about an issue where there's an inequity, right? It's in broadband access, rural areas, urban areas, some suburban areas as well. So there's quite a bit of work left to do under the pandemic. Getting the Senate to come closer to the House position has been difficult, but I still think that as of this podcast, as of this interview, we are in a position where things are likely to get a little tougher in the United States because of unemployment, businesses going out of business again.
Right.
And I really do think the numbers show that we need to do another round of COVID-19 relief to shore up the economy.
Right. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but aren't there large chunks of, even within the HEROES Act, that both sides agree on?
Yeah, there are. I think I wouldn't say there's large chunks where both sides agree on the exact language.
Okay.
But certainly there are areas that we're debating and discussing where there's a dime's worth of difference as opposed to $1 billion,
Right.
$1 billion worth of difference.
Yeah.
And but when you negotiate, right, until everything's negotiated, nothing's negotiated.
Okay.
So I think it's important that we do one package, not a series of smaller negotiated packages, in order to address these issues, and that's what the position that we're in the House of Representatives. And keep in mind, we did this in the House. We did our bill in May. We saw this coming, and now we've been waiting on the House, the Senate, and the White House to come along on that. So
Yeah.
I would also note we talked about the economy. There's also $75 billion in for testing, contact tracing, the kind of actions that we need to take on the public health side, because the public health response is going to lead the economic health response. We're still in that position. Wearing masks, being social, practice good social distancing. Those public health measures are going to do more to get our economy back on track than anything else that we can do. But we do need to do these other things to stabilize the economy. But
Right.
Public health is going to lead the economic health.
Right. Well, and I know there's a lot of people that are, within the small business community. There's a lot of businesses that are struggling or have closed because of this. I know, especially with the school system, that a lot of them are starting to announce their plans, and there's a lot of difficulties for the families that both spouses work, and then they still have kids, and what do they do? And
Yeah, and so the problems are piling up because, in my view, because we don't have a COVID-19 relief package, another round of COVID-19 relief for folks. But as schools reopen, whether that's hybrid or online or in person, and mostly around here it's been online with some schools going hybrid. I think most parents thought we'd be through this by now, and kids would be back in school in the fall, and that isn't the case. And I am, very empathetic to the frustrations that parents are having right now. I have siblings who are teachers and school administrators and principals and so on. One's a superintendent of an entire school district out on the peninsula. They're hearing it directly from parents, and so I do think that we need to continue to do all we can to get the public health response, get the answer to the public health moving forward, so we can get back to economic health and get kids back in school. But I am not a person who believes we should be forcing kids to go back into school. With parents, I do know parents want their kids to be safe.
right. And I think you've seen that in other countries that have started rolling that out, that it starts to spike again. And so they even countries like South Korea, who were very ahead of the curve, decided to re-shut down schools recently. So.
Yeah, and we're seeing a little bit from universities around the country where 18 to 22-year-olds are going to college, and now they're having to roll those plans back and go online. And I don't want to see that kind of thing happen in the K through 12 system.
Right.
So I'll do all I can to get help to their local school districts on this as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'd love to come back at some time when I have a little bit more time. But It's good to be home, away from Washington, D.C. and back home, and appreciate what you're doing.
Well, a big
here.
thank you to Rick Larsen for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening.
I will talk to you on the
And
next one.
I know political is a very hot topic. It always is, and it is probably more so now than ever. So I understand that there's a lot of listeners that are going to either be very for or very against what Rick Larsen is trying to do. But I do want to just throw out my empathy to anyone that is in a political position right now, because we are going through a pandemic that has not been seen for 100 years, or the situation of and the amount of stuff that they're having to deal with right now is just, it's just insane. And so whether you agree or disagree with politically, these our Congress, our representatives, I do just hope that everyone gives some empathy to what they're having to deal with. And anyways, they are trying to do their best in the way that they believe is best. So anyways, for any more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/60 or EP60. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP60. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.